This video is to go over the matrix logic homework for Math 279. I wanted to talk about 14C with Leanne, who wants to take band and drama. I set up the classes based on what our textbook had given us, with all the X's for classes that she cannot take during those periods because they're not offered. Notice I did not put the circles in because we did not know yet what period she would actually take things. So if we there we go. If we make the assumption that we give her both band and drama, and then if we look, band is only offered during period 1, so we can eliminate all these other classes period 1, and drama is only offered period 3, so we can eliminate all of these other classes during period 3. If we look through, according to our book, every student has to take English, math, science, PE, and lunch. Now, there is one obvious issue right off the bat. All of these classes, English, math, science, PE, and lunch, do not exist during period 7. So we cannot make her a schedule with both band and drama. So that answer would be completely acceptable. But if we look, we are told make up a schedule for her. So essentially, if this student came, we can't just say, hey, you don't come to school anymore. Oh well, we couldn't make it work. So the option that you would have to decide is, do you want to make this student take band or make this student take drama? Which one are they going to drop? And from there, you can kind of reason through which one of these period 7 classes the student would take, history or typing, and go from there. The next one I wanted to talk about was number 16, the classic problem. Because essentially with this, depending on what assumption you make, you're going to get two different answers. And it's not very clear which one is right. So that's the reason why I assigned this for homework, so that we could talk about the assumptions that we have to make sometimes to actually answer these questions. So this talked about the 3 businessmen, the Smith, Robinson, and Jones, where they live, and 3 railwaymen with the same or similar names. Now, essentially, we have to make one of 2 assumptions. Either the engineers and the businessmen have the same names and live in the same locations, or they don't. So, what some of you did was first focus on some of these clues. It said the businessman Robinson and the guard live in Sheffield. So we know that Robinson lives in Sheffield, and we know that the guard lives in Sheffield. Now, what some of you said then was, because of the way they worded it, you said Robinson cannot be the guard, because they said that they lived in the same location and because of that wording. So if we say that, then okay, Robinson cannot be the guard. So that is an assumption we made. If we look at the next part of this sentence, the businessman Jones and the stoker live in Leeds. So the stoker live in Leeds, and the businessman Jones lives in Leeds. Now if we assume that, then it's pretty easy to see here, or now if we also make the assumption, like we did before, that because they talked about Jones and Stoker together, they cannot be the same person. Jones and the Stoker can't have that same name. Then, with our kind of leftovers, we can see that Smith lives in between Leeds and Sheffield, and the engineer lives between, there we go, yep, between Leeds and Sheffield. The other thing that we have is, well, there's a couple things. The guard's namesake earns $10,000 per year, and the engineer earns exactly 1/3 of what the businessman living near him earns. That actually has nothing to do with it. I apologize, I skipped. If we're making those same assumptions, then the Smith cannot be engineer because they said Smith and engineer live halfway between Leeds and Sheffield. And because of that wording, we're assuming they're not the same person. Then last but not least, they tell us the railwayman Smith beats the stoker at billiards. So that tells us that Smith is not the stoker. So that means that Smith would have to be the guard, which means that Jones has to be the engineer, which leaves Robinson as the stoker. So the only question that they asked us was, what is the engineer's name? So that would give us Engineer Jones. Now, like I said, that's assuming from that phrasing, like the businessman Robinson and the guard live in Sheffield, that Robinson cannot be the guard. But they never said that. So if you don't make that assumption and say that it's okay for them to have the same name, or essentially assume that they do have the same name depending on the location, that's how we could get the other answer. So if we look at this, it says the businessman Robinson and the guard live in Sheffield. So Robinson lives in Sheffield. The guard lives in Sheffield. The businessman Jones and the stoker live in Leeds. So Jones lives in Leeds. The stoker lives in Leeds. Whereas businessman Smith and the engineer live halfway between Leeds and Sheffield. So engineer is between, Smith is between, and from that sentence, okay, if Smith lives between and the engineer lives between, then Smith must be the engineer. And we have engineer Smith. And that also works with that last clue. The railwayman Smith beats the stoker. The only thing we know is that Smith is not the stoker. Right? So we could make the assumption that because Robinson lives in Sheffield and the guard lives in Sheffield, Robinson has to be the guard. And because Jones lives in Leeds and the stoker lives in Leeds, Jones has to be the stoker. So it all depends on what assumption you're making with this problem. And that's really why I wanted to talk through it, because those different assumptions draw you to different conclusions.